Let me just summarize, probably in a slightly different way, what we have seen last week. Last 2 weeks, let's say, we were mostly focused on Grover search and its optimality. What was the issue? What was the main problem in Grover search? We were given a list of n items and we wanted to find a marked element. Right? Now, many a times there are a lot of details in the problem which are really not that important. In this problem too, let's try to kind of clean away some of the details which are not as important. So you tell me first, are the name of the elements of the list important? Does it matter whether I am searching a list of fruits, a list of names, a list of numbers? Do you think that that is important? It will affect the amount of time we need to solve this problem.
No, sir.
Right? I guess all of you will concur to that, right? That's kind of clear that the names in general are not important. We can call them 1, 2, 3 up to n for all we care. The important thing is the same mapping should be there when we say that, oh, is second element a marked element or not. That definitely is not important. In other words, we can say that our input, the list of n elements, it's just a string of length n. Right? This means x is equal to x1 to xn. These are the x1 is the first element, x2 is the second element, x3 is the third element, and so on, where xi is equal to 1 if and only if, any guesses? When do I want xi to be equal to 1?
Ith element is marked.
Very nice. If the ith element is marked. Right? So the names, since the names of the elements are not important, I can just get rid of them. I can just, every position, I have an index, first element, second element, third element, and the information I need there is that element marked or is that element not marked? And that could be figured out by this convention. Great. What other simplifications can I do? This might require slightly more thinking. Is it important that algorithm gives us the precise location of one? Precise location of one. One means the marked element. Or precise location
Precise location. You mean the or like the place where it is placed, like the nth position or something?
right. In the Grover search, does it matter the amount of time it will take and so on? Does it matter whether we ask the algorithm to output where the one is, or it just tells us, is it enough that algorithm finds if there is a one or not? It just tells you, oh, there is a marked element. Algorithm is not going to tell you in which position the actual element is. Question is clear. We can have two demands from the algorithm. One, the simple demand is that algorithm only tells us if there is a marked element or not.
I
A
think
more,
it would matter because I mean, in the sense that if we have just to check if there is some marked element in the inputs given to us, so we can, I mean, like in the case of Grover search, if we apply the oracle, the rotation thing, so we would see that some of the vectors coefficient has gone to -1, -1, right? So if that happens, it means we would just know that there is some marked element. We so we would be knowing there is some marked element because the state would have changed there.
no, but how do you figure out whether whether the state has changed? If the state is very, very close to unmarked elements and you just put a phase, that is not correct actually. So let's say this state, right? And this state. Notice that the last amplitude is changed.
So we would add one ancilla qubit or something like that to
Okay.
to create some superposition or thing like that, and then we would distinguish.
No, that won't work. These two states are very, very close in their inner product, right? You can check, right? These states are very, very close to each other. The angle between them is very, very small. And hence, it's actually not possible to distinguish them with high probability. Any measurement after any unitary, whatever you do, right? You remember what is a quantum algorithm? It will apply some unitaries and then measure. Clearly, unitaries can't change the angle between these two states. And then measurement, whatever the measurement be, if the two vectors are very close to each other, then their projection on one of the projective subspaces will be very, very high. In other words, for any projective measurement, these two will come up with a very, very close statistics. It is very, very hard to distinguish between these. But in some sense, you are right that this seems like a more complex problem, right? That instead of just finding whether there is a one or not, you also tell me at what index there is one. That intuition seems okay,
Yes.
right? But that intuition is only partially correct. In some sense, it is not very important. So let's say you have an algorithm that finds if there is one or not. Okay. A is an algorithm which finds if some string has a one or not. Right? And we have shown that we can do it in square root n queries or whatever. Can you find another algorithm which does not take a lot more time, but actually gives you the index of where the marked element is? You can, for simplicity, assume that there is only one in the input for this problem.
We just like something like binary search, we cut down the input space. That, I mean, if there are, I mean, if I take n inputs, then I'm just cutting it down, checking if it has one, okay, then I cut into half, check one part for the one, then the other part, and then I would reduce this size until I get to the element, things like that.
Very good, very good. So actually, given an algorithm to find if there is a marked element or not, it is easy to convert into an algorithm which gives the location of one. the idea as stated is binary search. What will you do? You will first say, oh, first half elements, is there a 1 or not? If there is a 1, then you will only search in the first half, otherwise in the second half. Then let's say you find out, oh, there is a 1 in the first half. Then you will again divide the input into 2 parts. First 1 by 4 elements, next 1 by 4 elements, and so on. And you can easily figure out that the location of 1 is at second position, third position, or whatever position. If A took root and time, then B will take how much time?
Root and login.
Very nice. Root and log n time. Right.
So I have a doubt.
Mhm.
So in the binary search, how do we know that one is in the first half or in the second half?
No, we will ask in the first. So first, let's solve for the entire input. Ask if there is a marked element or not.
Okay.
Okay. Now I will go to the first half. Again, apply this algorithm on this reduction. Is there a 1 in the first half? If it says there is a 1, then I will just search there. Otherwise, I know there is a 1 in the other half.
So on the previous page, you mentioned that we cannot distinguish those two states. Like we may not know if there is a like the phase has changed at one position, and those two states are quite close to each other, so we cannot distinguish them. So how are we getting to know that there's a one?
Oh, there is no quantum state here. You have an algorithm now which finds if X has a 1 or not. There is no state here, right? And then you want to convert it into an algorithm which finds the location of 1. There is no quantum state here. I am just using A as a black box.
So here you have written A finds if X has a 1 or not. Can you explain what does that mean?
It just if it is given a string of X, a length n string, right?
Okay.
As mentioned here, it will tell you whether there is a 1 in any of the n positions or not.
Okay, sure.
Right? That's the algorithm, and that's good enough to find the location just with a log n extra factor.
So sir, here we are considering only one occurrence of the marked element.
No, even if there are more marked elements, let's say I just want to find one marked element, location of some element which is marked.
Oh.
That I can do in log n mode time. But if your constraint is that you want to find out all the ones, then it is more difficult for sure. Yes. Then the time complexity.
So as we if we start always looking at the first half of the thing, so we might actually find the first occurrence of the marked element if there are multiple occurrences, right?
Sure, yes. But then you can modify your algorithm. You can say that every time I will randomly toss a coin and decide which half I'm going to look at. Or I will always look at the last second half, and all those things can be done. But the point here is that if your task is to find multiple marked elements, all the marked elements, then things are very, very different. Finding one marked element, finding whether there is a marked element is very different from finding the location of the marked element. So let me just write it this clearly. One task could be find if there is a search. Okay, I should not even say search. Let's say find whether there is a marked element. This is the simpler problem. And other is find location of the marked element. In case that your task is to output any marked element, you don't care which marked element it is, then these two problems are equal. If your task is to output all marked elements, then these two are not equal. But that you can kind of see, because if there are more than one marked elements, finding if there is a marked element actually becomes easy. If there are multiple marked elements, finding if there is a marked element, it becomes easier, right? More the ones are, you know, your state, marked state intuitively, even in the classical case, right? Your state, this theta angle will be big, and sooner you will reach the marked place. But giving location of all the marked elements becomes harder when there are more than one marked element. When there are more marked elements, you have to give location of more marked elements. That will become tougher and tougher. If you have to give a single marked element, then these two problems are equivalent. But if you say you want all marked elements, then one problem will become easier, other problem will become harder, and they will definitely not be equal. Make sense? Questions? Okay.
So why is the problem becoming harder if we have more than one marked element?
If I have to give the location of all the marked elements.
Okay. So when we have more than one marked element, we will get with higher probability one of those marked element, the location of
Yes.
one of those. So when we iterate multiple times, we will get many. Like
Yeah, but we'll have to iterate them, right?
yes.
And actually, so I was just saying intuitively, but if you look at the query complexity, if there are t marked elements, right,
Okay.
out of n, then this problem is actually square root n by t, finding whether there is a marked element. You see that as t increases, it becomes easier and easier. If
Oh,
you want to
yes,
find
yes.
give the location of all the marked elements, this is square root n t, and these bounds are all proved,
Okay, okay. That's
and it's becoming, so you see that it is t times square root of n by t, right?
So what about like finding the exact number of marked elements?
Oh, I should not answer this question. I have covered this. This is called quantum counting, right? This is what we did to find the number of marked elements, right?
So I
This
couldn't
is,
attend the last class.
that's okay. If you look at the notes, you just
Yes.
look at the Grover iteration. Its eigenphase actually depends on the number of marked elements. Then applying phase estimation on the matrix of Grover iteration, you can actually find the number of marked elements. That's the
But when are you saying that these two problems are equal? You mean to say that they are polynomial time equivalent, right?
Okay, you are right in the sense that when I say they are equal, this is in a very, very weak sense. I should say something like this. The complexities are almost equal, that we don't care to distinguish between. If one is square root n, then other is square root n log n, and you know the log n factor is just too small in comparison to root n.
Yeah. Okay.
That is what it's a very rough statement. I should say approximately equal or something. And if you want the precise statement, their complexities can differ by at most a log n. That would be the precise statement.
So why can't we apply this binary search algorithm in the second case when we have more than one mark?
You can apply binary search, but it will only give you one marked element, right? And then you will have to find another one, so you will have to repeat.
Yeah. Okay.
So you will have to repeat it t times, right? That is what I'm showing you here. It is t times square root n by t, which becomes square root n t. And this is the best you can do. This is known. Okay. The point I was emphasizing was, once you realize that finding whether there is a marked element is complex enough, then Grover search basically reduces to this question. Consider function OR. Sorry. What happened here? Okay, sorry for the interruption, but yeah, once you realize that the problem of finding a marked element is complex enough, our task is just this. You have this function called OR, given an n-bit string, it gives you either a 0 or 1. And OR of x is equal to 1 if and only if. Can you answer? What is function OR?
The string has a marked element.
You don't have, there is no definition of marked element here. If
There is
there
at least one.
exactly there is an I such that xi is equal to 1, right? Remember x, I am thinking of it as n bits. Right? Whatever we have done in last 2 weeks, I can frame in terms of this OR function. I have a function like this and an oracle. Classically, if I give I, it gives me xi. Quantumly, if I give I comma b, it gives me b plus xi. This is the oracle which is given to us, and we want to compute OR of x using minimum queries to the oracle. If I strip off all the what should I say, showcases and other things which are not important, if I remove them from the problem, this is the bare bone problem which we were looking at. Grover search is nothing but computing OR function. And what did we see? Classically, order of n, we can solve using n queries, and any classical algorithm requires at least n queries. How can we say that any classical deterministic algorithm will require at least n queries? Can someone give an argument? Any deterministic algorithm which solves OR has to query all the n bits. Seems obvious. Why?
Because for each element, it has to know whether the output is 1 or not. So,
Right. If my algorithm only queries n minus 1 places, then that means there might be one place where it has not queried. And my input could have been 1 there. Right? And then my algorithm will output the answer incorrect. Quantumly, What do I know? I can solve using
Root and queries.
very nice. And that follows from Grover search. And last lecture, we also saw that this requires at least these many queries. Again, I wouldn't worry about log n factor, right? Don't worry, there are some log n factors hidden there. I don't care. I'm only worried about this polynomial in n factors, which are big, which override any log n. This is what we have seen, and this that we need theta root n queries. This is called the quantum query complexity of OR. In general, I can define quantum query complexity or just query complexity. Query complexity generally means classical query complexity. I can define quantum query complexity or query complexity for any Boolean function. Instead of or, I can have a more complicated function. Let's see. Let's define quantum query complexity for any general function f. Remember, f is a function. This I'm simplifying, that's why I'm taking 0, 1 to the n to 0, 1. It can obviously be changed to something more complex. In the sense that you can have alphabets which are not Boolean, you can have outputs which are not Boolean. But let's stick to the easy case now. Given a function like that and an oracle, remember, this was the oracle. We want to compute f using minimum number of queries to OX. I have written compute in quotes. The reason is we should define compute precisely. A computes f if fx equal to 1, then a of x is equal to 1 with probability more than 2 by 3. If fx equal to 0, then ax is equal to 1 with probability less than, remember the bounded error setting, with probability less than
1 by 3.
1 by 3. Good. Remember, this was the bounded error setting. And then I can define the quantum query complexity precisely. It is the minimum over all A's which compute f. Maximum over all inputs such that number of queries A takes on input x. Remember this probability of the bounded error setting, these were over the randomness of the algorithm and not over the inputs. That is always the case. We always remember when we talk about randomized algorithm, the algorithm works for every input for a large fraction of random bits or internal randomness in the case of quantum algorithms. And then I can define the quantum query complexity. We look at the worst number of queries, worst in the sense of, for we look at all the inputs for A, whatever is the worst input, that's the number of queries for A, and then we search for the best algorithm where A computes F in bounded diversity. Any questions about this definition of quantum query complexity? In some sense, I have just summarized whatever was our notion of computation, whatever we did for Grover search, everything, and slightly generalized it now to compute any general function. Any questions about this formal definition? Okay. Then answer my question. Why is this important? Why are we looking at quantum query complexity? Why did we look at the query complexity of OR function?
To prove that Grover search can't be optimized, I mean, it is the optimized algorithm for searching.
Right, but optimization over time, right?
Yes.
The point is that this lower bounds the time complexity.
Yes.
In general, it is very hard to capture time complexity of the algorithm, but giving lower bounds, it is sufficient to bound the query complexity. And we have nice, again in quotes, nice ways of bounding query complexity. It's a substitute for time complexity. We can't find the time complexity of many problems. We say, okay, let's find something simpler, and that will give us some idea about the time complexity. What is that simple thing? That is this query complexity. It turns out that we have, when I say nice, mathematical ways, things which we can handle, and I will give you an example of that. We have lower bounding techniques which allows us to give concrete lower bounds on query complexity. In general, if you look at quantum complexity theory, most of the lower bounds, most of the concrete lower bounds actually come through quantum query complexity.
Sir, can you explain this mins and max once again? Like the blue box that you made?
Sure. Is the notion of A computing F clear?
No, sir, actually.
So this is coming from our original definition. We talked about randomized algorithm.
Yes.
We said that an algorithm computes a function F if whenever function value is 1, the algorithm should also answer 1 with high probability.
Okay.
And that probability we kept as 2 by 3.
Yes.
That's the first line. If fx is equal to 0, then ax will answer either 1 or 0.
Okay.
It should answer 0 with probability more than 2 by 3.
Yes.
That means it should answer
That
1
makes
with probability less than 1 by 3, right?
Yeah.
This was our definition of A computing F. Now there can be, now what is the query complexity of an algorithm? The quantum query complexity of an algorithm computing F is actually this quantity, max over x, number of queries A takes on input x. It's the worst case queries required for any input.
Okay. Okay.
That's how we define it. And then we want to find the best such algorithm, because there can be multiple algorithms which compute F, right?
Okay, sure.
That's why we have this min-max formulation.
Okay.
Now, you are all convinced that quantum query complexity is the thing to study. Then how do we study it, right? There are two main ways. Adversary method and polynomial method. Both of them are actually given in notes. For the purposes of this course, end this lecture, I will focus on polynomial. If you are interested, this is given in notes, and the reason is that this is extension of what we did for OR. The argument for OR, how we proved the optimality of OR, was some sort of an adversary method. And I have given the argument if you are interested in the notes, but it will not be included in the course in exams or anything. But interested people should definitely look at it. It's a very, very strong technique to give lower bounds on quantum query complexity. Today, we are going to talk about it is quite clear what we want to do. We want to lower bound quantum query complexity of some function. Now, when I say query complexity, I mean quantum. Always assume query complexity means quantum query complexity. That's what I'm talking about. In other words, I want to give a statement like this. Any algorithm which computes f in the bounded error setting, obviously, we are in the bounded error setting, has to make at least these many queries, right? One example of this would be OR requires at least root n queries. I want to give similar statements for different functions. I will always have a function at the back of my mind. Remember, when I say function, it's a Boolean function. And then I want to say that whatever algorithm you use on a quantum computer, it will take at least these many queries, and hence at least this much time. That's the idea. How do I prove such a statement? Let me write the main idea. The idea of the proof I will give depending on if I have time left in the end. Otherwise, you can find it in the notes. But the main idea is that whatever be your algorithm, it will have some final state. The final state will be in terms of many basis states. It will have lot of amplitudes, right? My final state will look like alpha 1 x1, sorry, I shouldn't say x1, but some z1 plus alpha 2 z2, alpha and zn. I will describe these z1 to zn, but it will have some basis. Your algorithm will run under some basis and plus some amplitudes. These amplitudes of the final state in a T query algorithm are polynomials of input variables with degree at most t. Don't worry about how you are going to prove this. This is something which we will see, but try to understand what this is saying. If you have any questions about what is the statement of this idea, please ask me questions. Proof will be later. But the statement says you will have some basis in your algorithm, let's say Z1, Z2, Zn, some Hilbert space in which you are working. Finally, you will have a state which is alpha 1, Z1, alpha 2, Z2. If you look at any alpha I, alpha I can be expressed as a polynomial of degree t in x1, x2, xn. Remember, these were the input variables. If the algorithm only did t queries. If the algorithm did 2 queries, then you will have a polynomial of degree 2. If you did 5 queries, then you will have a polynomial of degree at most 5. Any questions about this statement? Okay.
So can you give an example? I mean, for the case of Grover search or something?
That would take more time, but let me try to tell you what will be your basis in some sense in any quantum query algorithm, right? You definitely will have I and B, which you give to the oracle,
Yes.
right? And then you can have some extra workspace in which you are working, some extra ancillas where you do other calculations and things. In general, your basis will consist of something like this. And then your final state will be some alpha IBZ, where I goes from 1 to n, B is in 0, 1, and Z is element of some whatever I want to say, gamma, let's say, some set which I don't know, right? Z is extra workspace. I don't know how many ancilla qubits you are using, but all of them I'm capturing inside Z. And you will see that why this alpha IBZ becomes a polynomial. But let's say it is some polynomial. What does it tell us? Right? Now, what will your algorithm do? This is the final state, right? Then algorithm has to accept or reject. How will it do it? What will the final step of the quantum algorithm? Given this final state, how will it decide whether to say that fx is equal to 1 or fx equal to 0? What will algorithm do?
Measure it.
Right. The final step will be some measurement. Right. And that means when you measure in this basis, what will happen? What will be the probability of success? It will be summation over alpha IBZ whole square, where IBZ are accepting states. Do you agree?
Yes, sir.
Right. And since alpha IBZ was a polynomial of degree t, this summation, remember there is a summation also, finally this will be a polynomial of degree at most
T square 2t.
2t, yeah, not t square, 2t, right? Main idea directly implies that probability of acceptance of a t query algorithm is a degree 2t polynomial in input variables. Main idea is in some sense equivalent to this new statement. By the way, there was a small thing which I skipped. I said here that we measure in the standard basis, but that's not true. A general quantum algorithm can measure in any basis. It will apply some unitary, but that I give you as an exercise. If you apply any unitary here, the new amplitudes will be the polynomials of the same thing. When you apply the unitary, the degree of the polynomials doesn't change. That I give you as an exercise. If time permits, I will do it. But yeah, you have the final state. It can, someone can potentially apply a unitary and measure it. They need not measure in the standard basis, but that will not affect the argument. Finally, your acceptance probability will be a polynomial of degree at most. Once we know this, how does it help us to give lower bounds on query complexity? Right? We actually know something about probability of acceptance. What do we know? If so, let's say this is the probability of acceptance of algorithm A on input X. This is my new notation, not very difficult to understand, PA of X. Okay. Knowing this PA of X, given the bounded error setting, I know that if fx is equal to 1, then PA of X is more than
2/3 it's required.
if fx is equal to 0 and clearly probability has to be less than 1, then PA of X is less than
1/3.
someone else, 1/3, right? This is between 0, right? If you look at this, this is saying that for all X, PA of X is close to function value, right? I have to more formally define close, but this is what the statement is saying, right? If fx is equal to 1, then P of X is more than 2/3, less than 1, it is very, very close to 1. Similarly, if f of x is 0, then P of X is between 0 and 1. It is again close to, it is falling towards 0, 0 time. If I know PAX, then I will get f of x. Now, this actually gives rise to a very nice mathematical concept of approximate degree. There are actually more than one notions of approximation of polynomial, of a function with a polynomial. We will consider one which is required for us. What is an approximate degree? For an f, approximate degree of f is the minimum degree of polynomials which approximate. What does it mean that a polynomial p approximates f? This is same as saying that the value of p and value of f are very, very close. Some epsilon, let's say, let's not worry about epsilon, let's just say 1/3 for all x. Right? This is when we will say that a polynomial p approximates f. Right? For example, which function should I take? For a constant function which takes value 0, right? Constant function whose value is 0, what is the approximate degree?
Zero.
0, right? Because I can just take px to be 0, I can take px to be 1/3, whatever I take, a constant, I can take px to be any constant between 0 and 1/3, it's a polynomial, but still px and cx will always be at most 1/3. in general, if your polynomial has values 1, then 0, then 1 or something like that, let's say these are different inputs, then my polynomial, remember the polynomial will be differentiable and all, so it should look something like this. It should stay close to the function value. It need not attain the function value at every point, but it should stay close to the function. And then there can be multiple polynomials which does that. We are interested obviously in the best polynomial. Best means minimum degree. This is called the approximate degree. And remember what we have seen is that P of x approximates. Right? Remember these two things which we have seen. If A computes f, then PA of x, the polynomial, the probability of acceptance, approximates f of x. Second thing, PA of x is a polynomial of degree 2t if A makes t queries. These are the two things which we have. Okay, 2 I have not proved. 2 comes from main idea, remember. From main idea 2 comes, and 1 is something which we discussed on this page, right? That PA approximates F from the definition of however we defined approximation. PA of X is actually very, very close to it. So if A computes F, then PAX approximates F, and PX is a polynomial of degree 2t if A makes t queries, right? This should tell us something about the approximate degree of F. Can you tell me what does it tell us? Remember, approximate degree of F is the degree of minimum degree of the polynomial which approximates.
It will be less than 2t.
Right. If A actually computed F, then it would be 2t, or I should say 2 times quantum query complexity. Right? 1 and 2 are directly implying this. They are saying that the approximate degree of, since if there is a quantum algorithm for F of t queries, then I get a polynomial which approximates F of degree 2t. That means approximate degree of F has to be small. If I have a polynomial with only 2 queries which computes F, then I have a polynomial of degree 4 which approximates F. That means approximate degree of F should be less than equal to 4. If I have an algorithm which computes F, let's say A computes F with 10 queries. That means there is a polynomial P which approximates F and has degree at most
20.
20, right? And that means approximate degree of F is less than 20. This is an example, but the theorem which you get is that remember, this was a notation used for quantum query complexity. Q of F is more than approximate degree of f divided by, right? This is how, so this is how we can give a lower bound on quantum query complexity. If we show is high, lower bound on quantum query complexity. That was our aim. We wanted to give lower bound on quantum query complexity. Instead, we can bound approximate degree. And this is what I meant by having nice mathematical methods, because approximate degree has been studied in mathematics for a long time. We know lots of tricks and tools to figure out approximate degree. For standard functions, we know what the approximate degree is. And to your surprise or not surprise, if I ask the quantum query complexity of OR, sorry, I should say approximate degree of OR, what do we know? What is the approximate degree of OR?
2 root 10.
What will be your guess? Root 10, yeah. So this will also imply that Grover search will take at least omega root n queries. This is another proof of optimality of Grover search. Knowing this, this is again, I have not proven, but assuming this, and from our discussion, this box shows that the quantum query complexity of OR function is at least root n, but quantum query complexity of OR is same as the complexity of Grover search. That means Grover search will take at least omega root n. And this one was for Grover search, but in general, you can take many arbitrary functions and you can ask the quantum query complexity. This is a big area of research in quantum computing. This is the area, quantum query complexity area, where we try to figure for natural again, interesting functions f. Find relations between them and find relation between quantum query complexity and other measures of complexity. This is a big area of research. But the main premise of this is, using quantum query complexity, we can give bounds on the time complexity. Now, I have given you the way to prove that approximate degree is a lower bound on quantum query complexity. What is remaining? Proof of the main. If I give you the proof of the main idea, then it will be clear that approximate degree is a lower bound on quantum query complexity. Knowing the approximate degree of the function, we can tell that quantum query complexity will be high. That is the goal now. How to prove approximate, how to figure out approximate degree, how to prove the main idea for this polynomial method. What was the main idea? Can someone tell me? What was the main idea?
Sir,
Okay, let me do this. Wait, Snehal. Yeah, I haven't done this for a long time. If you are present, then raise your hands. I want to see how many people are actually there on the other side. Okay, interesting. Okay, almost everyone is there. That's good to know. Right. Yes, Snehal, you were saying something.
Sir, I think we wanted to show that if we have T queries in our algorithm, then finally the amplitude can be written as a polynomial of degree T.
Right. The amplitudes, there are multiple amplitudes.
Yes, so multitude
Will be-
amplitude of the
Amplitude will be amplitudes, final amplitudes, let's
Yeah.
say. Amplitudes of the final state or final amplitudes will be a polynomial of degree at most
T.
t.
In the variables of the input.
Good. In the input variables. Any idea how you would prove such a statement? Guesses?
We would go by something like what the query oracle could do. I mean,
Mhm.
the coefficients in input variables should be introduced by the query oracle only, not by the unitaries.
Very nice. Who is this?
Udit,
Udit. Very nice. Very nice point. Remember that we have, I talked about a general quantum query algorithm. It looked like something like this. Remember, we talked about this final state. Let's say on input X, after L queries, it would be UL, OX, UL minus 1, U1, OX, psi. Right? This was my algorithm. And here, there were two kind of operations. Unitary and oracle. Remember, unitaries does not depend on input variables. And every unitary operator is actually linear, right? That you can use to show that unitary operators will not change the degree. They will not introduce any other xi, and hence the degree will not change. For example, suppose at some point my state was x1, x2, 0 plus x2 square, x3, sorry, I need not have squares because x2 and these are all 0, 1 variables. x2, x3, 1 minus x1, 1. Suppose this was there, I apply some unitary, right? That means I have these amplitudes, and then there's a 2 by 2 matrix. It will be U11, U12, U21, U22. These are all constants. They do not depend on x1, x2. Right? If that is the case, you multiply, you will see that this is where the new amplitudes will come. And these will be a polynomial of degree at most 3. Because this will be a linear combination of previous amplitudes. Remember this U11, U12, U21, they have no information about x1, x2. They are just constants. That means these ones, for example, this will be U11, x1, x2 plus U12, x2, x3, 1 minus x1. Right? It will become a polynomial. It will still remain a polynomial of degree at most 3. A unitary is not going to increase the degree. Any questions here? Remember that this is the same thing which we used when we talked about measurement, which was I gave you as an exercise at that point. Remember I told you here that our final state, the amplitudes are polynomial of degree t. When I measure, I wrote it like this, but if I apply if I do a measurement in a non-standard basis, it doesn't matter, because non-standard means unitary and then measurement in the standard basis. A unitary will just shift the amplitudes. It will make only linear combination of amplitudes, and then I will measure in the standard basis. And then I will get some formula like this. It will always be a polynomial of degree at most. It was the same idea which was used. Right. First hurdle is taken care of. We notice that when we start the algorithm, we have some state, and then unitaries do not change the degree. I do not care about unit. What is the degree of the starting state?
0.
Yeah, obviously, right? Because we have seen this in the other argument also, the initial state does not depend upon input variables. It will have some constant amplitude on each of the bases. It is a polynomial of degree 0. I will have some starting state, alpha 1 IB, let's say I1 B1 Z1 plus alpha 2 I1 B2 Z1 and so on. But all these alpha 1 and alpha 2, they cannot depend on x1, x2 because I haven't done any queries. These are all independent of x. That means they are some constant. I don't need to worry about what value of these constant is, but they are sub-constant. And hence the degree of the starting state is 0. Good. The degree of the starting state is 0. We want to show that a T-query algorithm has the amplitudes have the degree at most T. Then what kind of statement should we prove about the oracle?
Some inductive statement, like in one query it increases the.
Right. We want to proceed using induction. So inductive statement, which will say that each oracle query will increase the degree by at most
1.
1. So is it clear that if I prove this, then I'm done? For the proof of main idea, the only thing I need to prove now is this statement. Each application or invocation of oracle increases the degree of amplitudes by at most 1. this is in some sense our main idea now. This is equivalent to main idea modulo the fact that any unitary does not increase the degree. Since unitary can't increase the degree, the only thing which can increase the degree is Oracle. If we show that Oracle increases the degree by just 1, then T queries of Oracle can increase the degree by at most T, and we will prove the main idea. Good. Let's prove this. This is also not very difficult. I have this basis state IBZ, right? Oh, sorry. What is the output of this?
IB XOR XIZ.
Very nice. IB XOR XI Z, right? This is the final state. What it is saying is that if Xi is equal to 1, then I get I B bar Z. If Xi is equal to 0, then I get state IPZ, right? Now, can I write this state as function of Xi?
XI times IB bar Z plus
Very good.
1 minus XI times.
Right? Now, if my state was alpha 1, I1, B1, Z1 plus alpha 2, something, something, alpha 3, so on, each of them will split into 2 parts where alphas, the degree of alpha is, will increase, right? It will increase by at most 1. The amplitudes now here will become alpha 1 xi, it will become alpha 1, 1 minus xi. Here it will be alpha 2 xi, here it will be alpha 2, 1 minus xi, and so on. And then some of these branches will merge because I could have I1z and I0z. Both might be present in my state. They will divide into 2, they will match up, and few things will be added up, but they will not increase the degree. That's just addition. That will not change the degree, right? This is showing that Oracle increases the degree by at most 1. So we prove the main idea. That proves that P of X has degree at most 2t if A is a T-query algorithm. This will show that the quantum query complexity is more than the approximate degree of F divided by. This gives a way to lower bound quantum query complexity of F, which in turn gives us a lower bound on time complexity of F in many cases. Okay. This is the final main sequence. We went in the opposite direction. We wanted to get time complexity. We said, oh, no, we will look at quantum query complexity. Then we said one of the way to lower one quantum query complexity is through polynomial method, which was approximative. And to prove that quantum query complexity was bounded by approximate degree, we needed to prove our main idea. But the proof of main idea was not difficult. It was essentially this box. This was the main idea. If I lost you somewhere, please go to the notes and you can finish, I'm sure, but I'm here for other questions.
So, sir, if we want to find the quantum query complexity of some function f, we would go and find the maximum degree of all the polynomials that approximate f, right?
Not
Then we would
maximum,
kind
minimum.
of get.
Minimum degree.
I mean, see, Q epsilon f is greater than or equal to the approximate degree by 2, right? So,
Yeah.
If some polynomial happens to approximate the function and it has a greater degree, then how can we deny that?
No. Approximate degree is defined as the minimum degree, minimum over all polynomials which approximate.
Got it.
Right?
Okay.
So we have to show that no approximating polynomial can have small t. Then we will get a lower bound. Notice that this is only one direction. That means there exists f where approximate degree and quantum query complexity are far away. Okay. It is a lower bounding technique, but it is not a sure shot method. There are functions where approximate degree is a bad indication of the quantum query complexity. But for many functions, it works too. Any other question?